Joining me today on Coastal Front, all the way from Ireland, is my former colleague and longtime friend, Bart Jawarski, Chief Executive Officer and Director of Group 11. Bart has over 20 years of experience in the mining industry, commencing his career as an exploration geologist in properties located in Canada, Russia, Costa Rica, and the Yukon. Additionally, Bart spent 12 years as a mining analyst, where we originally became friends. Incorporated in 2015, Group 11 is a mineral exploration company focused on advanced stage zinc exploration projects in Ireland. Two of their main ventures include Ballinalack project located in northeast Ireland and the Stonepark project near Limerick. Group 11 trades under the symbol of ZNG on the TSX Venture Exchange. Thanks for being on the show today. Love to have you back here.
Yeah, great to be back.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, for those listeners who haven't had a chance to listen to our previous conversations, why don't you maybe give us a quick overview of Group 11?
Yeah, okay. So thanks for the introduction, by the way. I'm a geologist and mining analyst, about 25 years experience in the industry. Started the company back in 2015 with David Furlong and another Irish geologist. We took it public then in 2017 on the Vancouver Exchange. We were fortunate enough to have Glencore join us as a major shareholder, number one shareholder in 2019. And then a year later followed that up with Mike Gentile coming on the register, being the number two largest shareholder. And here we are now. So we've raised about $20 billion, I guess, in the last few years. And yeah, we're focused on zinc exploration in Ireland, which is the richest jurisdiction for zinc in the world. It's number one in terms of zinc found per square kilometer. So it's a good place to be in.
Okay, well, that's great. That's a good overview. And it's been a tough market. We were just talking about that before we started filming. Share price has been beaten up, but not the only one in the market. I mean, it's amongst many other juniors right now. What's your kind of outlook on that space, being that you've got mining as an analyst as your history, Bart? We've been through this kind of thing before. We saw the market get smoked in 2008, and then we saw a super cycle come out of that in the commodity space. Are we at the beginning of the bottom here, and maybe a very big uptrend in the future, do you think?
Yeah, I'm. Things are looking pretty good despite the volatility in zinc prices. The refined market is in deficit right now, and it's projected to be double the deficit it was last year. So last year we had about a 200,000 ton deficit, and this year it's projected to be 300,000 tons. That's on the back of smelter curtailments because of high gas prices, and that's obviously in large part to do with Russian invasion of Ukraine. So we're seeing those types of constraints on the market. In terms of the concentrate market, which is really what the mines produce out there, that's in a less of a constrained position. So we see that with treatment charges going up, which usually means there's a little bit more concentrate out there. But in general, things are looking quite interesting in terms of pricing for the near term. It looks like it's constrained. It might continue to be constrained as long as energy prices are high. And in the interim, I guess, we'll see what happens with the renewable space, because that's really what's driving new demand into the zinc space. It's quite an exciting area, actually.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
So that was very helpful in making sure our listeners understand that there are two sort of zinc markets that pricing context kind of evolves around. Yeah. There's the refined, which is what's used to galvanize steel. That's one of the big uses of zinc, I understand. Mm-hmm. But then there's the market you're in, which is the concentrate market, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that'll be helpful as we go through this conversation. So I just mentioned where zinc's used, but let's maybe expand on that a little further. Like, can you give the listeners an understanding of, like, because when it comes to things like gold, we know it's used in wedding rings, and we know it's used in our mobile phones, and we know for lithium, everybody knows it's used for battery metals. That type of it's a battery metal. But I don't think it's so obvious for people what zinc's used for. So can you maybe expand in layman's terms what that means today?
Yeah, I mean, you could find zinc in galvanized steel everywhere, in cars and in construction products. 60% of the market is galvanizing steel, so protecting it with a coating on steel so it doesn't rust, and that's 60% of a 14 million ton market. The overall market in general, we call it we call it about 14 million tons. There's some recycling in there as well, but call it 14 million tons.
Okay.
60% of that is galvanizing. Then you got 15% of it, which is something called die casting, which a lot of people might not know what that is. That basically, if you have it's like mold casting. So you basically, if you have a machine part, you build the mold and then you inject some molten alloy into it and then it cools into the part you want. So that's about 15% of the market.
Okay.
Then you have brass.
The zinc is used as the
injection.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one thing. Then you've got brass and bronze. So that's another 10% of the market.
Zinc's used in brass and bronze?
Yeah. So bronze would be zinc and tin, and brass would be zinc and copper.
Oh, cool.
So for just an FYI, so those are the two differences, and that's a big part of the market. And then I think the remainder, it's interesting. You've got, I guess the last 15% is in rubber for your tires. So without zinc, your rubber would wear away within days. So that's very important. I guess you've got it in paints, also kind of handy.
Yeah.
For the modern world, you've got it in agriculture products, and you've got it in pharma as well.
Okay. Wow, that's really neat.
So that makes up
no idea it was used in rubber. That's really neat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so 60% of the market though is in galvanized steel. Now, is most of that steel, is that mostly in construction projects? Like, are we talking about
white goods, cars, construction? Yeah, it is infrastructure tied, and it is, I would say, if you track the PMIs, perhaps, I don't know what a good leading indicator is, but obviously steel prices would be a good indicator of the amount of construction activity out there. Okay. Obviously, these infrastructure projects getting rolled out now and amplified or magnified now in China and in the States. That is going to have a big impact, I think, on the steel market and therefore the zinc market, because a lot of that steel has to be galvanized. Some of it goes into stainless steel. You don't need any zinc for that. That's nickel. But the remainder, it's a zinc product.
Yeah. Wow. Who is the largest producers in the world of zinc today? If we go by country, not by company. I mean, we can talk about companies too.
So countries, China, 33%, the biggest by far.
Wow.
It's China, followed by Peru, about 12%, and then Australia is another third place, really big country for zinc production. You have India in there as well, the U.S., countries like that. Ireland used to be a major heavy hitter in the zinc space, but 2 mines have shut down over the last decade or so, Lachine Galmoy. And the existing mine, Navan, used to produce quite a bit, 200,000, 250,000 tons a year. Now it's down to 110 or so. So Ireland right now is about number 4 in Europe.
Okay.
And probably, I don't know, below, definitely not within the top 10 of the world anymore. But that's in terms of country. Yeah. In terms of company, it will be Glencore, Vedanta, and Teck would be the top 3 producers. Okay. Glencore produces...
The first and third are shareholders of Group 11.
Indeed.
Yeah, Teck and Glencore.
Indeed. Yeah. And Vedanta was actually mining in Ireland a deposit called the Lachine deposit, which ran out of ore in 2015 or so.
I've never heard of Vedanta. Is it a public company?
Vedanta. Vedanta is, I believe it is. Yeah. I could be mistaken.
Where are they based out of?
They're an Indian company.
Indian.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So
you mentioned 33% is China.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do they export, or they just use all their own? Like, are they just consuming every ounce of zinc they?
Good question. Yeah. Very good question. Actually, historically, they're a net importer.
Uh-huh.
They probably import about between 2 to 5% of the overall their needs. A lot of it is met internally, but they've been net importers.
Okay.
Right now, what's happened this year is because there's been so many shutdowns in smelting capacity in Europe. Europe is 20% of the smelting capacity. And there hasn't been a lot of use of it in China because of lockdowns. I think this year we're going to see an actually net export out of China. Perhaps a very small one, but maybe it's going to be the first year in a long time that we've actually seen a net export out of China.
Okay.
But that remains to be seen. It could come close, and maybe the net imports are just a lot smaller. But
yeah,
we'll see what happens.
Now, just because China and Peru are the largest producers, is that where the largest deposits are as well? Or is there other jurisdictions?
It's a little bit. So the 50 countries out there produce zinc. The largest zinc deposit is Gazouet, which is in Algeria. It's owned by a state-owned company, and they produce about 870,000 tons, which is a huge amount of zinc. So technically, they would be like, if you call that the Algerian government a company, they would be number 2 after Glencore in terms of production levels. Then you've got Red Dog in Alaska, owned by Teck, which is about 500,000 tons a year. You've got Antamina in Peru, another giant deposit, partially owned by Glencore. You've got Rampura Agucha, which is a mine in India, again by Vedanta, owned by Vedanta.
Yeah.
I think that's about 400,000 tons a year. And then you've got Mount Isa and MacArthur River, 2 massive mines in Australia, Queensland and Northern Territory, owned by Glencore. So that that's about 20% of world production right there. And again, Navan
about how much? Sorry,
about 20% right there.
Wow.
Yeah, so quite a bit. Navan in Ireland used to be up there as well.
Yeah,
about 250,000 tons. So still probably not in the top 5, but big.
Okay. Now you mentioned earlier about smeltering. So being able to extract zinc out of the ground is step 1, but step 2 is, I would assume, like other metals like aluminum, until you smelter it, which is like almost in a sense cooking it, get purifying
giant furnace,
in a furnace.
Yeah,
it's pretty useless, right? Is that a fair comment?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So where are the biggest smeltering? You mentioned that Europe represents 20% of the global smeltering activity, or has historically. Are there other places that have large levels of smeltering as well?
Yeah, Canada, Korea's huge. Korea
Really?
is actually huge for smelting. So outside of China would be number 1.
Okay.
Korea would be, I would say, number 2. I would say India and Canada rank up there in terms of smelting. But albeit smelters are shutting down in Canada, but those would be the major centers. China again being the major one, the really really big one, head and shoulders above the rest.
Okay. You mentioned that the gas prices as a factor in smeltering. I guess these smelters like the ones in Europe, which if Group 11 had a mine, a producing mine, say 10, 15, 20 years from now, I imagine that based on the current geographic, like the current makeup today in 2022, that concentrate would go to a European smelter. But it sounds like they're shutting down, or they have been recently because of the gas prices?
Some have temporarily. So they're not shutting down permanently, albeit there are certain speculations out there. Some of these might be because they were hobbling along anyway. So maybe these high prices, if they're sustained, could lead to a permanent shutdown. But I think most expectations are that these are temporary shutdowns. They will flick the switch again and start producing once the gas prices subside. And maybe they are subsiding already, but gas is quite a volatile commodity, super volatile. Yeah. So these guys have to weigh that against the treatment charges that they charge the miners. If there's more concentrate out there, then the smelters will be more emboldened by that, and will start charging more to the miners, because they'll say, well, even if these guys walk, I'll just get somebody else to come in and pay those treatment charges. So maybe if the treatment charges rise enough to offset the high gas prices, maybe it'll be economic for them to smelt again. Okay. But outside of that, we'll see what happens. I think if we had a product in 10 to 15 years, most likely we'll go to Europe. There's a lot in Scandinavia, France, Germany, those types of places. So there's quite a few to choose from. Okay. Yeah. Well, that's a good segue into talking a bit more about another consideration that most of our listeners would know, but if you know anything about mining, is access to ports, infrastructure, access to power, dealing with stakeholders. Of course, you mentioned Peru being one of the larger jurisdictions. Yeah. I mean, you've got indigenous groups in Peru. I don't think you have any indigenous groups you have to got as stakeholders in Ireland. So maybe can you talk a little bit about the advantages of where Group 11's resources or assets are versus some of these other major assets in countries like China and Peru and India? Well, the policy in Ireland is top notch according to the Fraser Institute. We're number 1 in terms of policy perception index, which is quite a big statement out of 100 jurisdictions worldwide that are ranked by the Fraser Institute. So for whatever reason, policy, what does it mean? So policy basically takes into account how the mining sector is run, how exploration prospecting licenses are divvied out, how transparent is it, security of title, those types of issues. Wow. And it's ranked number 1. So ranks number 1, surprisingly. Even over Canada? Even over Canada, yeah.
Okay.
So
wow, that's
now
impressive.
there's policy perception index, and then there's the overall investment index, and Ireland ranks number 4.
Okay.
I think some of the Canadian
That's still
provinces
very
are ahead
high.
of that. Yeah, very high.
Yeah, sure.
So you've got that going for you. You've got a stable political, democratic first world jurisdiction. The key thing for a base metal project is the infrastructure. You touched on that already.
Yeah.
So roads, power, tidewater, it being year round. We have a clean concentrate in Ireland. It's on the doorstep of European smelters. So it's a very good jurisdiction to be exploring for, especially if you know that the geology is the richest in the world in terms of zinc found per square kilometer.
Right.
So that's why you have so many companies operating in Ireland, like Boliden is mining there. Teck is exploring there. You had Vedanta mining there in Lachine. You have Glencore
Right.
with the Palace Green deposit next to us. And you have South 32 that's just acquired ground there through Adventus. So there's a lot of majors in the country, and there's a reason for that, and it's infrastructure, politics, security of tenure.
High concentrate.
Yeah, nice clean concentrate, so you don't have
Yeah.
a lot of nasties in there. It's very clean concentrate with sphalerite, galena, just in 2 of your metals.
Wow.
So it's got all that really going for it.
Yeah.
And again, the smelters being right there is very, very, very good as well.
Let's talk a minute about, thanks for that, Bart. Let's talk for a minute about the supply demand. We kind of touched on that at the beginning. You helped explain the difference between the concentrate market that Group 11 really is in and the refined market. And you mentioned that last year in the refined market, there was roughly a deficit of around 200,000 tons.
Last year, 200, yeah.
And then this year, about 300,000.
Yeah.
So that's cumulative, like 500,000 tons of
Inventory drawdown.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So being that Group 11 is in the concentrate market, and it doesn't have the exact same, can you just elaborate a little bit more on what that supply demand looks like today? And what kind of estimates are you hearing from your network of what the future looks like for that supply
For
demand?
concentrates?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, to give some numbers on it, I guess, last year the TCs, or treatment charges, were about $130 per ton. Right now, I believe they're about 230. There's rumors it's going to
big increase.
300. So that's
Is this
bearish.
inflation?
This is, well, again, this is that mine supply is going up. I think this year it's projected to go up about 3.9%, the mine supply.
Okay.
But the actual refined metal supply is only supposed to grow 0.9. So it's 3.9 versus 0.9.
Okay.
And that, again, speaks to the smelter,
Bottleneck.
the dearth of smelting capacity.
Okay.
But
So
demand is
just make
going up.
So we understand treatment charges are what? That's a gauge of, and what's that for? What is it?
That basically is the amount that the smelter charges the miner to take the mine's concentrate and turn it into metal.
Okay.
So they're basically
So obviously,
saying,
if they're cranking up their fees, it's because it's not like the miners would be able to go, well, if your fees are too high, I'll just go over there, because they don't have a lot of options.
yeah, there's a lot of concentrate out there. The
Right.
smelters are saying, well, if we can, get away with charging a little extra here,
Got it.
maybe we might lose one customer, but we know there's so much of them, they're going to come to us anyway. So we might
So
as
the
well
treatment
bump up our
charges
prices.
is actually a way to gauge what the market's doing.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
It's a really good barometer.
yeah.
That's the only really good way of knowing how much concentrate there is out there.
Okay.
Because there's no price for concentrate. It's not. It's not.
It
a
would have been the
benchmark price.
long-term average over the last, say, 5 or 10 years for those treatment charges.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
But I would guess it's hovering between one and it's we're kind of in that ballpark. But I would say maybe 150 would be an average.
Okay.
Stick my neck out on that, perhaps. Yeah. So we're kind of going from a fairly constrained concentrate market of about 150 last year. Now we're going to a slightly less constrained market with 230. We might get to 300 next year, or maybe later this year.
Yeah.
And then most expectations are it's gonna come off again, because there was mine supply that was held back by COVID, and now everything's ramping up. So there's a little bit of a bump coming on mine supply. But where how I look at that is that that's going to wear itself out or work its way through the system over the next maybe year to 2 to 3 years. Yeah. In the meantime, you've got the renewables coming on very fast. A lot of battery technologies are out there already, commercial, wind power, solar, all that's coming to the fore, and that's happening right now.
Right.
And that's where
we're going to get into that blue sky conversation. That's really interesting. So, again, going back to projections that maybe analysts out there who are covering this space, are they, I mean, aside from the blue sky opportunities that we're going to talk about, if you just looked at the primary reasons for zinc today, 60% of the market today is for galvanizing steel.
Yeah.
Is there a view that this is a fast-growing market? I mean, is there a lot of infrastructure projects coming on board globally? Is there a lot more need for galvanized steel in the future than what we've seen in the past?
Well, that's the big question, what's going to happen with infrastructure. But you've seen China come out with billions of dollars of extra infrastructure projects. They're loosening the lending requirements for the banks. So I think they're generally loosening the requirements so that you have more infrastructure spending. So they're definitely pushing more infrastructure spending, and the U.S. Build Back Better. So in general, in order to get over the induced recession we're supposed to be having here, something's got to offset that, and I think infrastructure has always played a big role in resuscitating the recession. So I guess the problem is inflation, so you got to quell that. We need to induce a recession, and then on the backside of that, you have to spur things along so things don't completely fall over, and that's where infrastructure comes in. And certainly there's a lot of infrastructure to be done in America. That is for sure.
That is for sure.
China's got a lot of infrastructure projects, Belt and Road, and other major mega projects.
Yeah.
So I think the galvanizing sector is probably on very solid ground, if not growing, although I haven't seen any projections for that.
Okay.
But probably a safe bet. It's probably going to continue to grow. Yeah.
I would. Yeah. It sounds like it. I mean, it's funny when you look at the cycle of the economy, and especially get a period right now. I've predicted that we are already in the throes of a very deep, long recession, and classically, governments, once we get into that, their go-to is to spend money on infrastructure, because there's a long history of evidence that when you spend money on infrastructure, you help spur the economy. Then the economy gets really good, and then they spend it on all this other frivolous shit. And they get really creative in how they can spend that money. It's too bad they just stay focused on infrastructure, and you'd have like just a booming economy for decades. But that's what happens.
Exactly. Platform for the economy.
Okay, Bart. So aside from what's known for zinc today, which is galvanized steel, 60% of the market, infrastructure build, that kind of thing that we just talked about, there's what I like to describe as blue sky opportunities. And from what we've talked about, from what I've read in the press, I'm going to dumb it down into three categories: batteries, solar, and turbines. So let's start by talking about how can zinc become a major input metal into these markets. Let's start with batteries, because today everybody kind of knows batteries for lithium ion or whatever it's called, right? Lithium being the main. So what do you know about the battery market? What's happening there with respect to
there's
zinc?
15 zinc companies right now working on 5 different chemical formulations of zinc batteries, and some of these companies are already commercial. So there's already demand for zinc in this space, and it's growing exponentially. There's a spectrum of chemistries. So there's the nickel zinc batteries, there's the nickel manganese batteries, there's the zinc ion batteries, then there's something called zinc bromine batteries, and zinc air batteries. Okay, so those are the 5 types of different batteries.
Okay.
And they basically span a spectrum of high power, short duration, through to the air battery side, which is the high energy or low power, high energy, long duration. So think of it like a flash of bright light is the one end of the spectrum in terms of energy, and then the kind of slow glow is it'll glow lower, dimmer, but for a much longer time, so it contains a lot more energy.
Okay.
And it's a long duration market. So there's a whole bunch of different applications in the market, but the biggest one right now, and that's the one that's quite interesting, is the grid power storage. So for solar and wind and not hydro, I guess, but it's mostly for solar and wind, there's big fluctuations when the wind blows, when the sun shines.
Yeah.
So in order to level that out and secure the system, you need zinc, you need batteries. Most of that right now is lithium ion, just because it's kind of a carryover from the EV market, because it's already commercialized, everybody knows it, but there are problems with lithium ion batteries for this application because they're not as safe. They need a lot of they have thermal runaway problems basically. They don't recycle very easily, so you have to spend a lot of costs on recycling lithium.
And I imagine
And
with lithium prices, they're very expensive.
lithium prices, so it's a scarce commodity. Then you got cobalt in the mix, which is really scarce. On top of that, got nickel, which isn't easy to come by either. So where zinc comes in is basically offers a much lower price point, much safer to operate. You don't need all these regulations about fire safety and then protections that jack up your costs. And then it's recyclable, so it's much cleaner from sort of cradle to grave.
Okay.
Or cradle to cradle, because it's just a circular. It's very easy to recycle. 30% of zinc out there right now is actually recycled. So, really? And that's going to be growing. So that's a real positive for zinc batteries. So there's a number of companies on the sort of bright flash side of things. You have NZinc and E-Zinc is on the other side. There's E-Zinc companies which is it's close to commercial status. Then Redflow, which is an Australian company, which is using sort of more for the grid power storage side. That's also commercial. There's Imprint, which is also commercial for the Internet of Things. So there's all these different variants of these batteries. But there's a number of these. I think for your audience, it would be interesting to know that these are actually commercial right now, as opposed to sort of pie in the sky in the future. Yeah. And also with NZinc and other companies, they're just about to be commercial, like 2023. Zinc 8 is another great example. E-Zinc for the grid power storage. These are companies that are very close to being commercial. They've already got large demo projects. Zinc 8 is a great example in New York City, doing large demo projects as well on their technologies. So it's a space to watch.
Yeah. And for these companies you've just mentioned and the batteries they're producing, especially the ones that have gone commercial, do they use a lot of zinc? I mean, or is it just?
Well, I'll tell you, maybe the best way to answer that question is to say what the projection is right now. And there's a number. There's the newly minted zinc battery initiative. There's the International Zinc Association. Bloomberg has a NEF. I don't know if you know that. There's the New Energy Finance. So you can look it up on Bloomberg. IRENA, which is this international renewable energy resource. So there's a number of groups that are looking at this very closely. There's a German group that battery consultants. Basically, it looks like this. So from 2020 to 2025, 2030, 2040, 2050. Let's just say that kind of time sequence. You have
5 year. Yeah.
You have about 300 tons being consumed right now, which is hardly anything.
Yeah.
By 2025, it's about 14,000 tons. Then it's a 14,000 tons. Okay. So from 300 to 14,000. You got 136,000 tons then by 2030. Some say 150,000 tons, so even more than that. Yeah. Then you've got a huge leg up. 990,000 tons is the projection, and then 2.8 million tons. Wow. So by 2040, 2050. So by 2040, 2050, if those projections are correct, it'll completely swell the whole demand side of the picture.
Basically what we've seen happen in the lithium space.
Yeah.
So I think decade.
You know, if you look at it, 2.8 million tons in 2050, that's about 20% of the market right now. So that's the kind. I mean, it's not going to double the demand side, but it's going to be a very big shot in the arm for the demand side. Wow. And the demand side slowly is growing. Like back in the 1980s, I think the total zinc consumption was about 8 million tons. Today, it's about 14,000 tons. So you can see that slowly. Million. Yeah, it's slowly going from 8 all the way up to 14
million.
Million tons, yeah.
Million tons, okay.
So from like the 1980s to today. So we know that the applications, the amount of use is growing year by year in general. Ups and downs along the way, but in general it's increasing. And it will increase now on the back of batteries, solar and wind, and like we were saying, infrastructure projects and what have you.
Yeah, sure. But what it's always been,
But the CAGRs on this are crazy.
Wow.
So the CAGRs on, if you just look at the 10-year CAGR on batteries,
so
in terms
what's
of
a
zinc
CAGR?
Usage.
What's a CAGR?
Compounded annual growth rate.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So the CAGR on that is like 84%, which is an insane CAGR. Wow. Right, for batteries. Yeah. Obviously, you're starting off from a very low base, 300 tons, which is essentially zero. Yeah. Going to 150,000 tons per year by 2030. Yeah. And then the 30-year CAGR, if you just look from now to 2050, it's still like 35%. Yeah. And again, obviously, all the health warnings along, these are just projections. It's early stage.
Still early days.
But it does look very dynamic. Lots of money's being raised. So right now it's all lithium, and I think lithium has, can hang on in this market. For EVs, 100%.
Yeah.
EVs are the way to go. They've got higher power density.
Yeah. I've got the new Ford F-150 Lightning. Drove it in today.
There you go. Yeah.
Maybe
awesome.
the next version will have a zinc battery in it. Okay.
Well, it won't. It'll be lithium still.
Yeah.
For sure. That's definitely not saying anything bad about lithium here. It's just that there's different segments of the market which are
it's a really
suited
good point,
for different
I think
things.
we all think of terms of batteries. Well, there's just one battery type, lithium ion or whatever.
It's so detailed.
But,
it's so detailed.
but if you think about it, like many things, I mean, if you're a cook in the kitchen, there's multiple types of sugar to cook with, right? And I would imagine that batteries should be the same.
Yep.
So when it comes to the next big blue sky opportunity, solar power is one of them. And but I don't understand, how can zinc be used in solar panels? I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, it's to galvanize the stems to hold the solar panels.
Oh, so it's not the solar
it's
power
not actually
itself, not the solar power panels, but it's the stems that hold it up.
Yeah. So there is some work to enhance the electronics of the solar panels, but that's years away.
Okay.
But right now, it's for galvanized steel to hold up the solar panels.
Okay.
And for big solar projects, big solar farms out there, that's what that's being used for. And their projections are for pretty significant growth. Again, compounded annual growth rate.
Every one of them has to be held up off the ground.
Yeah.
There's a lot. That's a lot of steel, right?
There's a lot of projections out there, and it basically assumes that there's going to be a lot of solar farm grid projects being built out, but eventually it's going to dovetail into residential. Mm-hmm. So the residential solar panels will use stainless steel.
Right now they do.
And right now they do, but it'll be more prevalent. So in the projections, they're assuming that it'll...
Because stainless steel has got to be way more expensive than using zinc to galvanize the steel.
Right.
And who needs a fancy looking stems on the top of a house? You're not going to look at.
So you can't really afford to do that. You can't use stainless steel for large solar farms.
Yeah.
It's just not economical. So they use galvanized steel for that, which is cheaper, just as strong, just as durable. Yeah. And which is a strange thing. You wouldn't really think of that, but it's actually a big part of the market. So right now, for example, looking at the same sort of time horizons, I think right now solar uses about 85,000 tons. In 2020 it was. So this is like a current number.
Okay.
85,000 tons of zinc go into the solar industry right now. And that's going to grow to about 210,000 tons by 2050. So 85 to 200. So that's a doubling and a bit. It's not actually a huge amount. And again, it
over
should
30 years.
Yeah,
it's not as big, but it just adds to the already growing demand between that and batteries and just construction and infrastructure.
Absolutely, it does. And the reason it's not a higher number is, again, because of this assumption made that it's going to transition to residential. If that assumption is wrong and we're going to continue to build out solar farms, then that's going to continue to grow much higher than what we're projecting right now.
I see.
But we're assuming it's all going to go residential, stainless steel, and no need for zinc.
Okay.
So that's kind of how it lays out. But it's still, again, in terms of compounded annual growth rates for this demand sector, you're talking about 7% over 10 years and 3% CAGR over 30 years. So not too bad still. Yeah.
Now the big one, of course, is what you've told me before, is on turbines, wind farms, right?
Yeah.
But not onshore.
Offshore, the world's going offshore. The world is going offshore. And
so offshore wind farms is what...
Offshore wind farms.
Okay.
So if you look at America, for example, a lot of onshore wind farms have already been built. Texas and other states, Texas being a major wind farm producer, wind energy producer. But now the trend is going, there's less and less being built in America onshore, and it's transitioning to offshore. A great example of that is off New York. It's called the New York Bight, the body of water outside of New York City. And it was a record-breaking auction, $4.4 billion back in March of this year. Number of companies competing for it, and the winning bids all total $4.4 billion. So that's a record breaker.
To build this.
Just to have the right to build.
The right to build.
The right to build.
Offshore
New York.
How far offshore are we talking about here?
I don't know in particular in this one, but it would be 20, 30, 50, 100 kilometers offshore. So
you wouldn't really even see it probably.
Exactly, you wouldn't. That's the idea. It's farr away, you can barely see it or you can't see it. And
now,
the idea,
why is this growing why? It seems odd to me. Building on land just seems so logical. Putting something out in the ocean, it's like prone to
Harder.
like you got to somehow secure it to the ocean floor, and you got salt water, and you got like, I don't understand. So fill me in.
Better wind. There's no
Okay.
wind shear, so no buildings and trees to get in your way, number one.
Right.
Number two, no opposition or less oppositions. There's no one out there saying, I don't really like the look of this,
Right,
or it's,
good point.
you know, what have you,
Yeah,
shading my
the fish
house
have
or
no
what
rights.
have to. Yeah, when you're out in the middle of the ocean, you get better wind. You don't have people as much objecting to it. It doesn't seem to affect fish or in a negative way. Positively, actually, it does.
Yeah.
There's more to hang on to.
Yeah.
And the other thing is the correlation of wind. So if you look at how the wind blows on the continent, it's pretty much on or off. So all these things, all these different wind sources are correlated. If you go offshore, you have an uncorrelated wind source.
I see.
And that's really important for stability of the wind power.
Right.
Because all of a sudden,
if power coming onto the grid.
So there's there's a big element of that actually, and also costs are coming down dramatically. So it's a very
How big are these wind turbines out on the offshore?
like 1990, the first wind turbines were like 0.5 megawatt, and now we're building them to like 20 megawatts, and there's plans to go to 25 megawatts for a turbine. These things are basically like three 747. If you take a 747, which is about 75 meters long, it's about 3.5 of those would be tall. So I mean,
man, they must look so ominous out there in the ocean.
They're about a quarter of a kilometer high. So they're 260 meters high. Some of these big ones, and there's no limit really. I mean, humanity is pushing the boundaries of wind energy right now. So they're experimenting with bigger and bigger blades, bigger turbines. There's so much that goes into it in terms of lightning strikes affect it. Wind speeds are huge. The amount of dirt in the air has a big impact on the economics of how these operate. Again, this is just basically what I've been able to glean. And the reason I've been able to glean it is I've been talking interestingly to some people recently in Ireland, because this has an Irish angle to it.
Okay.
Ireland is 7 times bigger by sea than it is by land, off mostly the west coast.
Yeah, right.
It's a huge country if you look at the sea rights.
It's got lots of wind.
And that wind is 20% faster than the rest of Europe. Power is a cube of wind speed. So you're talking much more power. And power means economics. So there's a lot of reasons why Ireland is poised to be, and this has been said, the Saudi Arabia of energy for Europe.
Really?
Yeah. So right now...
And then we tie all this back to zinc.
Mm-hmm.
The reason you need zinc is it is an anti-rusting agent, right?
Well,
basically, it's
offshore needs 10 times more zinc than onshore wind turbine.
10 times?
10 times, yeah. It's a lot more of a corrosive environment, so you do need a lot
water
more
everywhere.
Salt and wind, and so the amount of galvanizing you need for wind power is a lot higher, and
10 times,
that's going to drive a market. Now, so again, that's a big demand center, and that's only rising. If you just look at
what are the estimates on those numbers? It's got to be out of this world.
Well, it's not as out of this world as you expect, but it is still like an 11% CAGR from now to 2050. Right now, there's about 24,000 tons estimated to be 24,000 tons going into the wind sector. By 2025, that's supposed to go to 60, roughly 70, and then end up, I think, around 160,000 tons by 2050. Yeah. And again, the reason it's not bigger because the huge monster wind turbines are supposed to be having more megawatts per metal used.
I see.
And so, again, that's a bit of an assumption in there that they've worked in, that maybe we won't need as many of these turbines because they're getting bigger.
I don't buy it, though. I mean, if all these nations are looking to like completely electrify their
to me, that sounds very conservative.
Totally.
And these things are getting bumped up year by year.
Like you look at your British Columbia, right? I mean, there is like, to electrify this province, there are just so many bottlenecks along the way. And I believe supply of electricity will continue to be one of them. One of them is the grid system of having all these charging stations. If you want to just get the EVs to start, you got to be able to get the EVs built. Yeah.
It's an interesting part of the market. I used to cover the nuclear industry back in Raymond James, as you know, so I have a little bit of an understanding in the electricity markets through that. But what's interesting about Ireland and other jurisdictions is if you can't connect it to the grid, because that's billions of dollars of infrastructure, hydrogen is the answer. And this is where Ireland is going, and a lot of other countries around the world are going. So they're going to create the wind, pool it, electrolyze the water. You split the hydrogen from the oxygen, and then you take the nitrogen from the air, combine it with the hydrogen to create ammonia, which is a lot easier to transport than hydrogen, which explodes. So you can't really transport hydrogen, but you can, without any infrastructure spending, transport ammonia. And this is the answer. And this is what's happening post-Russian invasion of Ukraine. There's a lot of countries knocking on Ireland's door to say, we want your green hydrogen. So make it work if you can, because there's a huge opportunity here for you.
Wow.
So that's the dynamic happening over the last few months. I mean, this is already bubbling away in the background for many, many years, but now it's in overdrive.
Yeah.
All this stuff is happening very fast, and I don't think Ireland's the only one. If it's happening in Ireland, it must be happening everywhere else as well. And definitely what I'm seeing in these record auctions off of New York and what have you, that's a global phenomenon, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So again, that's kind of an aside, but green hydrogen is going to be quite big on ammonia storage.
Yeah.
And that is going to be a big driver for zinc.
Wow. Well, it's interesting. I never would have thought that the clean energy sector would be like a potentially huge driving force in raising the value or the need for zinc beyond just the old galvanizing steel need. So it's really fast. I mean, that's what's still being used for.
I guess to add the three things together,
yeah,
you're talking about 110,000 tons today,
yeah,
going to about 3.2 million tons by 2050 in this sector.
That's huge.
So again, that's about a CAGR of 13% over 10 years.
Yeah.
And about 11% over 30 years, rough numbers.
Yeah.
So it's still a double-digit compounded annual growth rate.
And we're talking
now to 2050. So
right.
It is going to be a big growth driver.
Yeah.
And
we're talking about right here is not even current use. This is future use of new uses that didn't even exist 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Nobody was talking about.
And it's such a dynamic field right now. I mean,
so
much money is getting raised for this, for batteries.
Yeah.
So much money is being raised for bigger and bigger and more efficient wind turbines.
Yeah.
Solar costs
farms,
are coming down fast. So it's only a sector that's going to grow. So it's going to be interesting to watch over the next few years.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let's take this all back to Group 11.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit more about the company. What are you most excited about? We're kind of mid-2022 right now. You guys have been continuing to do drilling at some of your key projects in Ireland. You're fairly well financed right now. You got some good, decent amount of money in the bank.
About $3 million.
And you mentioned Mr. Gentili. And Michael Gentili is actually a key investor in his company as well.
Okay.
Yeah. He's one of the strategic investors. And
fantastic
guy.
Yeah.
So a guy like him is a very smart guy.
Yep.
He's amazing track record in this space. So he obviously sees something in Group 11. And you're the CEO, so you do too. So talk a bit more for the viewers. The share price has been smacked, as we said earlier, with all the other juniors out there. So maybe some good value opportunity here for an investor to come in at an 8-cent, 9-cent stock price when just not too long ago it was at 17. What are you most excited about right now with Group 11 in the second half of 2022?
Well, we just potentially discovered the source of the zinc in the Limerick area. So the focus for Group 11 in Ireland is the Limerick area. And opposite to us, butting up against our ground, is Glencore's Palace Green deposit. It's only a few kilometers away, and it's trending onto our ground.
Wow.
And we think we have potentially the feeder structure. So this would be hopefully something equal tonnage, but maybe higher grade, maybe more copper, maybe more silver, maybe a copper deposit underneath it. That hypothesis hung on the idea that there's a major fault structure on the south side of this whole land package, and we just hit it. So we just hit a fault, and it's the first major fault that we've been able to find in this entire camp. And it doesn't appear that there's any faults of that magnitude. There's smaller faults which have a displacement of 20 meters, 30, maybe 10 to 20 meters. Here we've got something that's 150 meters minimum, probably like 250, maybe even more. And that's a major down drop. And that's good because the down drop means that there's been a lot of movement along that fault. Fluids must have flowed up. This is talking about back when the deposit was formed 350 million years ago.
Yeah.
And now the idea is that we've been looking for this for a long time in this camp, since 2002. That's when Palace Green was discovered. Our deposit is sitting right beside it. It was discovered in 2007. Again, no major faults found there. We're saying, where is all this coming from? We know zinc deposits in Ireland come from faults, but no obvious fault structure has been found. So it was postulated up until a few weeks ago that it's on the south side, and we just hit something that looks like it could be at least part of this major structural fault system that could be the feeder. And where that fault meets the base of the target horizon is where our big prize would be. So we're looking at a massive target there. You know, dare I say, if I can say it, $1 billion type of, it's a target. And again, forward-looking statement there.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing we're hoping to find if we drill. We're hoping to find intersections of, you know, many meters and a lot higher than 10 to 20% grades, that type of thing.
Wow.
So that's the most exciting thing within the company right now, because
Yep.
we finally clinched this fault, and that fault has zinc in it, by the way. There's 12 meters of visible sphalerite along it. So that's a really good indicator that came from lower down, which is, again, another exciting bit of the puzzle, bit of evidence. So really our job is to drill that target at some stage. We're also hopefully in the not too distant future, so hopefully sooner rather than later. Let's just say that, but I'd love to drill that tomorrow if I could. And I think most of us would agree internally. Yeah. So it's just a matter of making that work. And then we also have another target called Ballywire, where we also have discovered recently some brand new massive sulfides, 3 meters of 12%.
Yeah.
And we're just following that up as well. And that's on the Palace Green trend as well. And I guess to finish the arc of what we were talking about earlier with wind power, green energy. So what I'd love to see happen is if we discover the next big zinc deposit in Ireland, in the Limerick area, it's going to be on the west coast, and by then hopefully we'll have a lot of green energy. Yeah. And so in terms of an ESG perspective, it'd be great to use either ammonia to power the equipment or what have you, or grid power by that point. But it'd be nice to have green energy coming directly from the coast,
right,
and power industry within Ireland. And part of that would be hopefully some zinc mines,
yeah,
that carry on the legacy. Ireland has a 60-year legacy in modern zinc mining.
Yeah. Well, that's very exciting. That would be a nice story to tell 20 years from now, 15?
20. Let's just say maybe 10 to 15
10 to 15, yeah. I mean, that's the thing that I think people here in Vancouver know. Like, it's not like oil and gas where you poke a hole in the ground, discover oil, and it's out in the
producing.
Next 6 months.
Yeah.
That's not the life of a miner.
Yeah.
Well, this has been exciting.
Yeah.
I always love talking about zinc. Nerding out on the conversation of how to galvanize steel.
Yeah.
This blue sky opportunity is really exciting. It's quite. It'll be interesting to see how that unfolds over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. Bart Jawarski, CEO and Director of Group 11 Resources, all the way in from Ireland. Thanks for being in today, Bart.
Thanks for having me.
And best of luck.